Chapter 1 of the book Betel Nuts and Other Stories by Simeon Silverio Jr. Betel Nuts. Huwag kayong maingay at baka mapansin tayo ng lolo. Don't be noisy. Grandpa might notice us. Brobo told his cousins Ray and Pablo. It was 1955 and they were all 8 years old. They were climbing the tamarind tree in front of their grandparents' house on 15th Street in Sampaloc, Manila, Philippines. Borobot was about to grab a single fruit off the branch when a stone flew by his hand. Their grandfather, Lolo Ambo or Grandpa Ambo, was shooting at them with his slingshot. He scampered down, warning his cousins. Dali, tinitirador tayo. Hurry, he's hitting us. Pabling, who was climbing below the robot, fell to the ground. Ray, in his haste, stepped on the robot's head. Once his feet hit the ground, the robot ran away as fast as he could, with Ray closely behind. Pabling, who was chubby and heavy, managed to stagger up and followed them. Aray! Ouch! Wailed Pabling. A stone from the slingshot hit his buttocks. He was crying as he crossed the street and went inside their house. Their grandfather had warned all of his grandchildren not to climb the tamarind tree, but the kids were like Adam and Eve, disobeying God's order and desiring the forbidden fruit. To boys like them, the transgression was simply an unavoidable adventure. Pabling was still rubbing his buttocks as the three ate the tamarind from their pockets. They were not all sweet. Some were malasebo, all halfway ripe. Lolo Ambo was a grumpy old man. He was born and raised in Malolos, Bulacan, while his wife, Lola Abe or Grandma Abe, was from a nearby town, Florida. The two raised their family first in San Miguel, Manila, then along the shores of Parañaque, and finally on 15th Street, Sampaloc, Manila. The clan lived in a cluster of houses on one part of the street. From the 1940s until his retirement, Lolo Ombo was a driver at the Metropolitan Water Works System. Since his children and their families lived across the street, his house was like an extended household. His children often visited them, and his grandchildren were used to staying and sometimes playing in his house or front yard. Whenever they gathered in his house, they would help prepare the betel nut concoction he enjoyed chewing. First, they removed the husk. Then they cut the meat into pieces with special scissors and placed them in a stone mortar with some blind pigs. Afterwards, they pounded the concoction into pieces using a stone pestle. The grandfather would chew it, and when he spit it out, his entire mouth was covered with red dye. Old folks often used the mix as a mild stimulant, similar to drinking coffee. In the jungles of New Guinea, National Geographic TV reported that sometimes it even had the same effect of drugs in making people feel high. Pabling, Lolo Ambo's grandchild, who was named after him, was still bitter due to the tamarind tree incident by his grandfather's house. Mischievously, he volunteered to prepare the betel nut concoction. When everyone was not looking except for Borobot, he put a hot native pepper called siling labuyo into the mix. Borobot tried to stop him, but it was too late. Mahuhuli ka niyan, you'll be caught, Borobot warned Pabling. But his cousin was more clever than he appeared. Pabling wrapped his mix in a piece of paper and waited for the right time to put it with the mixes the others had prepared. The next day, the grandfather picked up the mix, put it in his mouth, and suddenly wailed in disgust. No matter how much water he consumed, the burning sensation on his burnt tongue remained. By that time, Pabling was safely ensconced in their house, way beyond suspicion. Their grandfather had many suspects. After all, he had shot not only one, but many of his grandchildren as they tried to climb the tamarind tree. He could not figure out the culprit's identity. Pabling got away scot-free. He was smirking, boasting to Borobot at every opportunity. However, Pabling's elder brother, Pichi, overheard them talking about it. Pichi threatened his younger brother and told him he would report Pabling to their grandfather, but he never did. The grandfather never learned who the culprit was. He passed away 2 years later in 1957. In 1981, Pichi, at the age of 32, was shot and murdered by an unknown assailant. His mother remained unsolved. 5 years later, at age of 35, Pabling succumbed to a long illness. For the past 30 years since Pabling's death, the case of the siling labuyo in their grandfather's hot betel nut concoction had become a well-kept secret known only by a single soul, until Borobot decided to write about it. Sub- Subscribe to Philippine audiobook channel to hear more interesting, entertaining, and informative stories both in YouTube and in podcast. Thank you.